I'm delighted to be here and to share the St. Patty's Day afternoon with everybody. And as I'm watching people come on, and so many of us know each other over the years, we're going to have fun today looking at our colorful personalities. And certainly during this time of this 30 minutes of the networking, I could really see, and I think you can too, the personalities coming out. And so for today, this is one of my absolute favorite topics. I work a great deal with senior leaders, particularly out of Southern California with the big county governments down there, and for a number of years. So these folks are in a leadership academy for 5 months. Last year, we had done some initial training, some work together when COVID hit. So one piece, a foundation of that huge leadership academy, and also in the work I do with leaders, is starting with really understanding people and their personalities. This is one kind of diversity, but incredibly valuable. For who am I sitting like Dave in your NCET board that you're with, or John and I were part of the community of practice with NNHRA. I know Susan Mahoney here works a great deal with different teams. Carol, in your entrepreneur work, when we're sitting with other people and those personalities, including in our families, when we can know temperament and appreciate the differences, particularly in times of change, particularly not only pre-COVID, but we're going to talk about what's happening at this point, how the different personalities, each of us, as well as family, colleagues, our bosses, etc., respond to change. And what I'd like us to take away is, first of all, just a sense of real curiosity. And as a professional coach, we live and breathe curiosity. When we're curious, when we can step to the side and say, I'm just curious, how does Paul West see the world? How does he process that? How does Jody do that? When we can step back, how do I do that? Step back, see and appreciate those differences. We're actually much more tolerant of ourselves and the people that we interact with. Many of us, and I think probably a number of us on this call, have been trained in the Myers-Briggs inventory, or either trained in it or certainly have taken it because it's been around since the early 40s. The four lens temperament actually overlays Myers-Briggs and the temperaments by putting color to it. So I first was introduced to this through the National Guard here in Nevada, when I kind of snuck into a training that they were having just for military, but I had some military connections, so got in to be trained in the four lens because I'm also a Myers-Briggs person. I loved it. I got certified in it, licensed in it, and now I'm one of the very few, if not the only one, doing this for private corporations. So colorful personalities, my business is Career Connections of Sierra Nevada. I've had my office downtown for 17 years and been in business about 21 years. So for today, as I mentioned, different perspectives, different realities. And particularly, I'd like you to be thinking about not only pre-COVID, but all the things that are happening right now with COVID, even, for example, just the vaccine rollout right now. How do people see that? What's their reality? What's their lens that they're seeing things in? And this goes a great deal to our personality preferences. You'll hear me using the word preferences, which simply means kind of that natural preference we have of seeing and responding to the world. We do, because we get a little bit older, a little bit wiser, we become actually quite good at using different colors. We are a blend, depending on the situation, but we have those natural preferences. We can often see this with younger children. It's really fun to watch kids or our teenagers or 20-year-olds, because it's a little bit purer to watch the personality styles in action. We're going to talk about stress, particularly related to COVID, and what leaders can and need to do. I'll share a bit about what my leaders down in Southern California are doing and how they pivoted and how fast they moved. We're going to have time to hear from folks. And Dave, we're a relatively small group, so I'm happy for people to unmute themselves, jump in. And I also, since I know a number of you, I'm not shy about asking you for your thoughts and your opinions. There is so much wisdom in this group, Dave. There is tremendous. And we've all been around for a while. We know people, we enjoy people, we've been watching people. I come from a background of being a social worker, then went into being a psychotherapist, LCSW, San Diego, East Coast, and then over to Norway. Worked many years cross-culturally in Norway. And I'll share a bit about that when we start talking about change. But first, let's do something kind of fun, which is a mini self-assessment. And I usually, when we do this, I usually have some really neat booklets supplied by Shipley Communication, where I was certified through. They do all the military and federal government, but we're going to do it sort of live right now. So I'd like you to be thinking, each of you. I'm going to describe 4 personality styles, and I'm going to associate a color with each of them. And this will seem familiar to you. And those colors are, I call it a true blue, a deep green, a solid gold, and a bright orange. So blue, green, gold, orange. So starting with, I'm going to just put my hat on and I'm going to tell you what each of those colors really value. Now, for the folks that like to read fine print, here's a general chart here. On the left, we have more of that left brain, and on the right is more the right brain. So let's start with our greens. I've got a husband that's a green, green gold, but our greens value, let's say I'm a green, I'd say as a green personality temperament, I value data. I value knowing all the information. Don't come into my office with a lot of chit chat. I want to get right down to what is the information, what's very concrete. I'm a very logical thinker, and I'm very skilled, really, at big picture, complex problems. Give me all the moving parts, and I can connect them together and propose solutions. Being competent is really important to me. It's hard for me when people are incompetent. I need time to think. Many times I'm a bit more introverted, but not always. But I really want that time to think about what's the data, what's the information. I want to know all the details. I'd like you to be thinking of a first and a second choice on these colors. Kind of what, just at gut, what resonates with you? I have found over the years, the last few years of offering the colors, the 4 temperaments, that I encourage people to think back to when they're a bit younger. So often as we get older and we've worked in different work environments, we tend to kind of, this is how I should be. And it's hard to remember what we were like more as a young person in our 20s. So if you can, put yourself back to, gosh, what really are some of my preferences that I prefer? When I do a longer program, and I have a lot of fun, I do this a lot, we really go into different ages and the predominance of certain colors in different ages. But for our purpose today, we're going to work on just a general first and second choice. Okay, second one. Our goals, again, that's is kind of the left brain. Our goals bring the gift, and I use the term gift. That's a Myers-Briggs term. It's a wonderful reminder that everybody is bringing a gift. Our goals bring the gift of the guardian temperament. That was the original name they gave this temperament. They are like the rock of our society. They are the folks that, as a goal, I value being very organized. I have clear goals. I make the plan and I work the plan. I make the plan and I work the plan. I want to be able to measure the outcomes. Accountability, punctuality. I am dependable, as I want other people to be dependable and to honor really their word here and their hard work. We'll see a lot of folks that gravitate towards certain industries in all these areas. But for instance, the goal will quite often see a lot of the military, perhaps law enforcement, people that are the guardian of our society, kind of want to maintain status quo as well, which also is they are the traditionalists quite often. So we love our golds. My husband's a real strong gold as well as a green. They like staying with what has worked before. It's worked before. We always go to the same restaurant on Friday night. We know where the menu is. We know where to park. We know the price. That's a gold speaking. It's worked before. We don't need to do something different because we can do what's always worked. So we love our golds. They're the ones that keep the movement, keep things moving forward. Okay. So be thinking of that, green and gold. When I finish with the 4 colors, I'm going to go back to you and ask you to share your first and second. Okay, let's go to our right brain. And I'm going to go over to our blues. This is where, Dave, when we were talking in the networking, the conversation going back and forth, do we get back together live in these different professional associations? Do we not do that? Do we invite the family over for different events? Do we get together with people for birthdays, over the holidays? Relationships are huge for our blues, the blue temperament. This is the NF for the Myers-Briggs people in our group, the NF, intuitive feeler. They process things, they see the world from their heart. From their heart, that's the F. And the intuitive part with them is that these are the folks on your team. When you think of being on a board or group, is that they have just an incredible sense of what's going on with other people. They can read a room. They read other people. They have a tremendous sense. That's the intuitive side of them. Trust is huge. A blue will work their heart and soul out for you. They'll trust you basically to the end. But if you sabotage that or disrupt that trust too many times, when they quit, they quit. When they quit, they're done with that relationship. There's no kind of in between, which is very interesting in the military when they use the 4 lens, a great deal with deployments, people deploying overseas, family members here, and they use this a lot, and a lot of our family members are more that blue. So trust, personal connection is huge. Harmony, think of all the conflict we've had over this last year, and people feeling that tremendous conflict, not only with all the COVID, but with all the Black Lives Matter, the racial concerns, all of our politics, wear a mask, not wear a mask, start school, not start a school, tremendous conflict. And this has been particularly difficult for our blues here. So as a blue, if I have my hat on as a blue, I'm also not only concerned about my immediate circle of relationships, but interesting, you'll see the blues showing up on nonprofit organizations and causes. They bring a real sincere concern for the greater good, for what's going on in the world, what's going on in my bigger community, and a real sense of how does this impact other people. So think of the blues on your teams, as well as your golds, as well as your greens. Every one of them is bringing a gift to you. Now, our oranges have been fascinating over this past year. This is the SP temperament. The oranges are the ones, particularly we see this in younger people. Sometimes I think it kind of gets squashed out as we get older, but this is the wonderful sense of adventure, a sense of action, flexibility, creativity. Our oranges are one of saying, I don't need to know all that information. Let's just go do it. And we'll kind of evaluate it later. So it's spontaneous and very much the hands-on experiences. When you're around an orange, it's very much those sensors. That's the SP, the sensors. What am I feeling? What I'm seeing? What am I really experiencing in my senses? They really love this. So for instance, the earthquake presentation up at UNR, when we go up there, when we're part of that, to really see sort of hands-on. It's one of the great things, Dave, I always loved about the Wednesday, tech nights. I personally love going on site, hands-on, seeing what's going on. Our oranges on your teams value independence. Now our greens very much autonomy, but our oranges is, don't get in the way. They're moving so fast and they love that challenge. And as Carol Hines is on our call today, I always think of Carol as always have been the entrepreneur spirit. Lots and lots of your entrepreneurs have this wonderful gift of the orange, of that temperament, of just, let's give it a whirl. Let's give it a try. So I'm going to pause now and ask for folks to share two of those temperaments that resonate the best with them, those preferences. And if I could, I'd love to start with you, Carol.
Okay, do you want to guess what it would be?
No, I'm not. I don't want to assume.
You kind of alluded. So orange is number one for me. I mean, and that follows through my whole life. I mean, not just being an entrepreneur, but being a glider pilot, racing gliders around the country and so on. So that was my number one. Number two was my first gut feel was the green, and then I thought the blue. But the problem with the blue for me is avoiding conflict. I do not avoid conflict, so I think I'm an orange and green.
Okay, great. And the green, how do you think the green shows up as you're preparing to take an aircraft up?
Well, I think of a couple things. One is the logical thinking and complete information. I'm doing my checklist. It's if I don't have the checklist in the cockpit with me, I get out of the cockpit and I go get it. Also, thinking through everything, because in a glider I'm going to be towing. So thinking through that whole tow even before we start to move, so that I'm prepared for things that might happen.
Yeah.
And when you're flying a plane, you have to fly the plane no matter what happens. So you have to be good. So being competent. I'm a data person. I need data. I love data. I don't only like data for me and what I do, but I get really excited about helping other people figure out how to use their data to be, pointing out that they have the data and helping them to figure out how to use it to be more successful. So
I love it. Carol, that's a wonderful, description of both, is that sense of adventure, the challenge, the competition, the doing that, but it's grounded on that green, the gifts that you have, the accurate information. It has to be competent. It has to be complete. And so you're pulling both of those in to really be successful. A perfect example with that. Exactly. How about, let's see, how about you, Jackie? What are your thoughts?
It's funny, I think gold and blue, but I had the same reaction Carol did about avoiding conflict. I don't avoid conflict because it makes it worse when you do.
Yeah.
But that might be something I've learned as I've gotten older as well. But no, I'm all about the structure, and it makes me crazy when there's no plan and people just kind of go off and hope for the best. That is not me at all.
Yeah.
And I am all about the people and the relationships. So those two.
Yeah, those two. Isn't it interesting, Jackie? And then we're going to talk about how COVID has impacted that. But having that plan, as you say, sort of makes me crazy to see people just, well, let's just kind of go see what happens with that. Exactly. How about Jody? Let's finish up with Jody. Do you have, what would you suggest or say, Jody?
I'm orange and green, probably slightly more orange than Carol because I'm a little less focused on that kind of stuff. So I would drive Jackie crazy if we were dating, but I think I love a challenge, but I also like to see the big picture and kind of look at it fully and say, okay, here's where we are, but here's where we can be if we put this and this and this in place. And just do it.
And it's really interesting in families to watch colors in action. And what I so love, Jody, is that, and this is what Myers-Briggs has said, for the mother-daughter team, Isabel and Katherine said back in the 40s, when we understand our natural preferences, we're much more tolerant. We don't then slide into saying, why can't he think like me? Or why does he seem kind of so preoccupied on just maybe the data instead of seeing the more human side of it? When we're able to just say, oh, that's the green coming through, we're able to step back and then build those really solid communication. Jackie, when you're talking about crisis communication, I would get quite naturally that in communication, you're responding and customizing to the needs of these different personality groups. When I always had some great exercise, one of the most fun is to have a group work with the different colors and have them take on a big project. Like, for instance, I had worked in Katrina when the big floods happened. This is a number of years ago. So it's fun to think about, okay, the challenge is you have to mobilize an emergency team within, let's say, 48 hours. What colors are you going to involve? And then what kind of roles and responsibilities? So a really savvy leader, and I want to move on to this part here, the middle where those colors intersect, they call that, in the training, they call it the nexus, N-E-X-U-S. Basically, it's the middle section there that a really mature leader or savvy leader basically lives there. They recognize, of course, their own personality preferences, but they can be in that center in which each day they're responding and customizing their communication, their work with each of these temperaments to bring out the best. The goal of a leader is to bring out the best of their people, because that's where the work is being done. That's where the work is being done. During time of incredible change, that's a challenge. So the leader is living in that middle piece there, that middle size. So I'm going to go on. Okay, we're navigating best in the nexus. When you watch, I'm sorry, somebody want to say something?
Yes. You gave us a gift for the gold, the guardian. Is there a keyword for each or gift for each
Oh.
of the others?
Yeah, thank you, Paul. Is that it's so much fun when you kind of get into this, but the key word I have here on this slide is the green is kind of the competence. Our gold is the structure. Blue, relationships. Orange is the adventure. Dave, can folks see that PowerPoint, I hope? Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
I can see it.
Good,
Got
good. I know it's small. Paul, I love when you were talking earlier in the networking, I didn't have a clue about what some of the things you were saying. That wonderful, I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's a bit of green for you in the scientific analytical data. And also you're a pilot.
Well, I'm actually so old. The Greeks came up with the notion of the four temperaments about 3,000 years ago.
Yes.
And I learned it from them. So I've been mapping this onto, they referred to these because they thought that the four temperaments or the four social styles were a result of the amount of certain bodily fluids that people had. So
Yeah.
they referred to them as sanguine. Oh, come on. It'll come to me. The basic, the choleric was the torpedo, damn torpedoes full speed ahead leader. The phlegmatic had too much phlegm, so that was your blue. And the sanguine had too much blood. They were the adventurous, spontaneous types. And what you refer to as the green or competence, they were melancholy.
Yeah.
And,
Oh, I love that. Paul,
so
you bring up,
I've been mapping these things.
oh, I love it. Because Paul, you bring up the great that actually, and when I do longer sessions, we go back, there's all the way back to the Greeks and Romans, all that is people, they have always studied the diversity of personality, and it goes back way. And interesting, Paul, the consistency, even different names, but the consistency that these kind of general temperaments have been very consistent. I always wonder if folks want to learn about themselves or other people. When I do this kind of assessment, I'm always intrigued that actually people really like it. I caution though, please don't go back to your spouse and try to, or especially your kids, and try to put them in a box. It's just recognizing that this is just one way of understanding and appreciating the gifts people bring, but very, very helpful as a team leader. Very, very helpful. Let me go on here and thank you.
I'll jump in one other time. I learned this, and it's wonderful to hear your presentation here because you're doing a fantastic job of explaining this. Whereas when I've heard about the color methodology before, it was not as clear. I appreciate that very much. Using the four temperaments and using them to build communication bridges is the way I was taught with it. But it's also allowed me to stay in difficult situations much longer than I could tolerate otherwise, because I understand what's going on with the others, and especially when there's a difficult person, it just helps you to work with and understand the reasons why this person is difficult.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll be quiet.
And Paul, thank you, because as we talk about COVID, when we look at the conflict, the differences in how people are seeing a situation, it's the lens, it's their reality. And, I might go, where are they coming from? I don't understand that at all. But, as you said, it's if I can step back and say, or let's say, for instance, I have a girlfriend that's quite green, and she's analyzing researching all the thing about the vaccines and all the different kinds. and not too sure because I'm not too sure I should get it. And have they analyzed it enough? Have they done it enough? And of course, I am the orange and the blue, and I say, it's good enough for me. Why do you have to keep analyzing it? So appreciation, Paul, of where other people are coming from, and that tolerance to, maybe stay there and just say, they just see it differently than me, and it's just as valid, it's just a different preference. I'm going to move on here because over the years, one of my specialties and has always been working in people in change and transition, particularly when I lived in Norway and worked a great deal with the cross-culturally expat community. And the idea of a change, so I'm going to ask you now, we're going to take kind of step to the side of that. We're going to look at change. And first of all, we're going to look at that a change, and this comes from William Bridges, who's kind of the guru of transition. A change is an external event. It's simply an external event. It has no emotions to it. COVID, the virus, is an external event. A wildfire is an external event. A move to a new house is an external event. Getting married, having a baby, buying a new car, adopting a dog, they're all external. That's not the hard part. The hard part is the emotional, psychological adjustment to the change. And it's fascinating. I always remember, it's been years now, sitting in the living room of, I did a lot of work with oil and gas industry in Norway, because that's their big industry. We were with NATO, but the oil and gas was the biggest industry. And I had a chance to, I think I was doing the Myers-Briggs with this gal. She was from India, had moved a great deal. The oil industry moves their people almost within a week. They are told to, report into, Bahrain or something, or South America. She said, I have moved so many times cross country, internationally, but I don't know why this time it was so hard. These 5 factors, if we can keep this in mind, really helps us understand that. And I'm going to overlay that to the COVID here in a second. I'd like you to think of a change in your life, just a change, a simple change that you have had maybe over pre-COVID. So just a simple change. And I'm going to ask Jake to go off mute and tell me about a change that you have.
One for me was moving across country.
Okay.
I'm not originally from Reno, so that was a big change.
Okay, so a geographic move is perfect here. That's a real easy, and not a real easy, but it helps us understand this. Let's look at that move across country. Okay, the first thing is looking at the timing of a change in our life, the external event. Was that change on time or off time? Meaning, was it something that generally in our life chapter that we would expect to be happening? So let's say on this move here, was it something that, I had finished up college and I was making a move across country, or my son is leaving high school and he's going to college, or I'm getting married and we're expecting a baby. So it's sort of on time. A change that is off time is something that happens that we didn't expect it at this time. For instance, let's say my father, who was an attorney here in town, was 94 when he passed away. It will loss, but it was kind of on time. It's what we sort of expect. If my child dies before me, that's off time. So the timing, is it on time generally, or off time, is important for how I'm going to emotionally adjust. A sense of control is huge. Is this voluntary? So like for you, Jake, you know, the question of that move across country, was it something that was voluntary? Yes, I wanted to do it. I elected to do it. Therefore, I have a greater sense of control. Or was it something that happened and I essentially have very little control over it? So the sense of control makes a difference. The intensity is interesting. Is that how intense is that external event? So let's say we're sitting here and we experience a very violent earthquake. And the intensity of that, and we all jump up and we scatter, that intensity at that moment versus, let's say I've been thinking about buying a new car and I spend a couple months looking at it and I decide to get it. Far less intense. With this is also looking at duration. And this is fascinating when we think of COVID, but the duration of a change in my life. So let's say I'm diagnosed with cancer and it's very serious, you know, it's significant. So that essentially is going to be with me throughout my life. So it's an ongoing duration. Having a new baby is very intense. At the beginning, remember, none of us could sleep the first few nights, but it's that babyhood is of shorter duration. 5 is the effect on all the areas of our life. If we have an external change that affects just a small piece of our life, let's say just our personal life and not our professional life. But if it's a change like Jake's moving across country on multiple areas of our life, that definitely is more, it can be more of a real challenge to deal with that, to emotionally adjust to that. I'd like to overlay that with, let's look at COVID. And I give, and over this last year, have given multiple workshops pro bono or for my leaders about the phases of COVID and how people are responding to it. I originally studied sociology, so for those of us who are sociologists and psychotherapists and social workers and coaches and trainers, all that, we're in the people field. We are really kind of, when we're not afraid, we're really fascinated with what's going on, and there's going to be books written, studies, etc. We're already seeing a lot come up. Anyway, let's look at our landscape global crisis. This is the term that I saw first written about a year ago. This is the what they were calling it, landscape global crisis. And basically what that so adequately says is that this is a crisis that affected all areas of our lives. So landscape and global. So it's a global crisis. The timing, remember last March, I was over at the Atlantis giving a presentation for our HR group. I think it was on St. Patty's Day. I think it was today, a year ago. And then we were shutting down, or maybe it was the day before, shutting down the next day. So no forewarning, very sudden onset with overwhelming speed. I keep thinking of like a tsunami. Remember when the big tsunami happened? I think it was in Japan. That sudden onset, overwhelming speed. We've never experienced anything like this. So the timing, the sense of control, and this is interesting at the beginning when we say, oh, this is just going, if we just do these things for the next 3 weeks, it's going to be good. As things went on, and this is that duration, is that realizing we really don't have much control, but how quickly different personality styles pivoted to analyzing the situation, what we can do. This is where our greens are really good. And then our golds are the ones that operationalize it, that put it into action there. our oranges bring that gift of the creativity. Let me think out of the box. And our blues are taking care of our people. Intensity, severe disruption all across the board, both in our personal lives and in our work lives. So usually there's something that stays the same. So let's say even 9/11, when that hit our country, is that for the most part, our personal and our work lives continued relatively unchanged. There were some things that, of course, were resolved, but relatively unchanged. So severe disruption in every area of our lives. Duration, unknown, no beginning and end. We're seeing some light at the end of the tunnel. But remember, a year ago, we said, oh, this is going to be by summer. By the end of summer, by the holidays, it's a natural tendency is that we want to have some sense of duration, so we have some sense of control and the effect on all our areas of life. So thinking about your team and what has stressed each color pre-COVID with any change in their life, but also particularly during this COVID pandemic. So for our greens, at the beginning, not having the information, not having data. I gave you the example of my girlfriend down in Sacramento, not having the data, not knowing, is anybody really competent? Is the CDC, do they know what they're doing? Does our government know what we're doing? Does the governor know what they're doing? Does anybody, our greens, looking for that accurate information and the competence so that they can really drill down and get some certainty. For the blues, I want to really honor that temperament there. The loss of personal connection on the teams with their work colleagues. LA County, I work with the IT gentleman in charge of LA County, the Health and Human Agency down there. And he said, Kit, we tried for 2 years to get people to the county commissioner, board of supervisors to okay remote learning. No, nobody would go for it. The community wouldn't want it. The public wouldn't want it. The people wouldn't want it. Overnight, within 2 weeks, they sent out, I think it was 1,800 eligibility workers to work remotely. Initially, people said, hey, I kind of got this. Now I kind of figure out how to do this. But we're seeing now, over the last couple months, the blues, not all of them, but many of them saying, I want to be back with my colleagues. I want to see my colleagues. I want to be with my colleagues. I want to, be in that presence. Because remember, the relationships are really important. So our blues, that remote working was a challenge. Personally, to sever the personal relationships with friends, or like your parents are in extended care, the parents of the kids that your kids play with, your friends. The severing of those personal relationships and the message to be afraid of them, to not be around them. There's some very interesting things being written about trust and remote learning and the issue of trust with colleagues. But personal, never before in this country have we had a situation where the personal relationships were severed. The personal contact, not 9/11, not Pearl Harbor, not when we have these changes of wildfires or earthquakes, the natural disasters. Never universally have we been told, do not get together with other people. This is crushing to our blues. So leaders that are, remember, live in that middle, live in the nexus, become very good at creating as best as they can the connections with our blues to continue to bring out the best for them. Now our greens remote work has worked, not for everybody, remember, but just relatively well, because a lot of them are a bit more introverted. And some of my introverts say, hey, I didn't want to see people anyway. Don't call me. I don't want to see people anyway. For our goals during COVID, not having a plan, what Jackie, I think, was talking about there is that she likes to have that plan. Boy, all those plans, strategic planning for the next year, for the next, that just went right out the window right away. In California, the infusion of monies that came in, I believe it from the CARES Act, all of a sudden having to make plans for how do we provide services? How do we use this money in certain critical areas? Our goals then, and hats off to all these temperaments able to pivot and go to more short-term planning. So that's where a really good leader will say, okay, we are not planning on a long-term basis. This is particularly last year, well, even now, but we need to plan right now, immediately. We need to pivot very quickly to continue to provide service. Now you'll notice as I'm talking about certain industries that, and that's interesting, how COVID impacted different industries. Who could more easily go remote, who still had to serve it directly. So that's time for another discussion there. But our oranges there, COVID, actually your oranges on your team and for ourselves actually navigated the COVID the best of anyone. Because remember, our oranges don't need to have all the information. We don't know, and that's okay, we'll find out later. So more that spontaneous, more in the moment, more comfortable with uncertainty, the risk-taking, a little bit more with the risk-taking. So actually, the leaders leading teams realized that the oranges brought tremendous gifts to the discussion, to the conversation, to the planning, to what do we do next, and we need to do it fast. So those oranges, there's a wonderful quote in one of the books, I love it. It says, oranges make things happen while others just sit back and wonder what just happened. What just happened? And the oranges are already going for it. So thinking about the, we've talked about, and I've been weaving this in what leaders do, customizing really for each color. The most mature leaders you're watching, they're just doing this. They're just moving. They're very active. They don't, I mean, I've been so impressed. The leaders that never expected to be in this position, there'll be books written about them, but the best of the best, they are, as Patrick Lencioni said in an article a year ago, and it was 3 lessons for, I think it was 3 lessons for leaders in this time. But his first recommendation is be exceedingly human with all your colors. To be involved, to be hands-on, to be connected, to be exceedingly human. When people are isolated, and I speak from, years of being a psychotherapist with Kaiser, when people are isolated and start to feel very alone, is that anxiety starts taking over, and maybe some of that discouragement, disengagement, and also loss of confidence. So I'm so glad there's a lot more attention being paid to what's happening with children, teenagers. I've read that children 7 to 8 are having the hardest time right now. They've even named that next generation, Generation C for COVID. The life event of COVID and how this is going to affect their development as children into adulthood. Going to be very interesting, and it really was quite concerned too. So with that, I'd like to pause. We've hit some real key things here, just hitting the highlights. I'd like to hear from folks. Just what did you learn about yourself today? Susan Mahoney, if Susan's still on the line, she's a professional coach with a lot of experience. I'm sure she's smiling right now because this is a true coach question. What are you learning about yourself? That self-awareness? And what did maybe you learned about another color that perhaps surprised you a bit? So I'd love to have someone volunteer, or I can.
Sorry.
Susan.
I was
Yay,
on.
Susan, okay. What do
Sorry,
you
I was
think?
on mute. It's the one thing that we talk about the most. 3 words that are the most said right now are "you're on mute," right?
Oh, Susan.
So what I learned is that I'm pretty equal blue, orange, and green, and gold. I need to outsource. Right. I just need to outsource that. So I learned about myself, and then about others. I learned that there are people in my world that are gold. And since I'm not, I need to work harder to understand where they're at when we're trying to collaborate or communicate. I need to work harder.
Perfect. Susan, you have tremendous experience with teams. Is there any, as we were talking here, any sort of team dynamic or team that kind of comes to mind where you've seen a couple of these colors?
Yeah, and I think Kit, you did a great job explaining how it shows up on teams, a really good job. So I think that was a really good learning, I think, for myself and many other people. I guess I would just throw out, because I have done a lot of work with teams, is that when somebody gets hijacked, when their emotions get hijacked,
Yeah.
and I don't have the answer to this, but when somebody's emotions get hijacked, what happens to their innate color strength? Because I see people get hijacked, and you know, like what's happening with their color, and how do we bring them back to base?
Please explain hijacked.
Yeah, that's a coaching term. Hijacked is like they've lost control, right? They've lost control. They're hijacked. Like there's some stress in the meeting that just has triggered them, and they're completely triggered. And then if you're a leader or a facilitator, you know, the learning is, how do I get that person back to base?
So this would be the alternate style they switch to when they get backed into a corner.
Yeah.
Got it.
Susan, I would add, and I didn't have time to get into it, but when we work on strengths, you know, we use the term basement behaviors, or going to the basement, or going to the dark side. But Susan, you're absolutely right, is that, and we can feel it in ourselves, Paul, when we're starting to get hijacked or just getting triggered. And so what we can get more rigid or more set, or don't you understand? Can't you see what I'm saying? Why don't you see it my way? A strong green can trigger me. It's like, I don't have the time for this. You want all the details, all the data, you keep, you know, all this. Can't we just move on and get it done? So being aware, thank you, Susan, of what can trigger us. And we have a choice then, Paul, of either going to the dark side of just getting so rigid, or you got to see it my way, or stepping into that middle and ask a question. I'm curious, what are you seeing about this that I am not seeing? And then Linda may speak up and say, well, can I actually see this? Okay, I'm getting it. So Susan, would you add anything to that?
No, I think that was perfect. Asking good questions to calm them down, and asking for feedback. And Kit, you know, I used to do a lot of training of type A yellows, right? Or golds. And I watched this happen a lot, and I wasn't skilled at the time at knowing how to bring them back to some oxygen. And so that's helpful.
Yeah. Jody, Susan's an awesome speaker. You should tag her, you know, if you give her enough, maybe a bottle of really nice wine, you might be able to persuade her.
Nice.
You got me, Kit.
Jackie, you want to jump in?
Well, I think one of the reasons I love this type of thing where you do find out and identify how people are different from you is because of that, because we can always learn. I think we can learn a lot more from people who are different from us than people who are like us. And like what Jody said about that we would not do well together, we would do very well together because somebody needs to shake me out of the plan, you know, and be spontaneous sometimes. And so I think that whole asking questions of things who are different from you is hugely valuable.
That's
Yeah.
actually a really good point, Jackie, because I need people to keep me grounded and to say, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? I say, well, no.
Yeah,
Sometimes I don't want to think about it, but I know we have to.
I'd be super annoying all on my own.
Why not drive you crazy? But we would have fun. We'd have fun.
Carol, going ahead.
So when I described myself in the green and the orange zone, I was really thinking about me personally and not kind of in business. I mean, this past year, I've kind of worked alone, and I spent a lot of time not in the air, but working with and hanging out with pilots. But when you described that we operate in the nexus as a good leader, I realized why I identified with the blue and the gold, because I managed a group of software developers for 10 years. And I had a lot of these in there. And so, and even when I'm working with entrepreneurs, being in the gold, teaching them that they need to plan and being passionate about that with them. And then also the trust. You've got to have the trust. If you've got a team that has deadlines and needs to work together, you've got to build trust amongst them, and with entrepreneurs too. So in my business world, as a consultant or as a executive person or a manager, I always operated in that nexus. And that's what I learned today. Why do I identify in any way with all four of these? Well, that's why, because I've had to be there. Sometimes it's not natural, but you have to come there.
Oh, I love that, Carol. And that's what I said, is that really that mature leadership. And that we have really seen over this year, incredible leaders stepping up. We've seen other people hide under their desks, but the people I have the honor of working with down in Southern California, I said, oh my gosh. And I've never heard those leaders complaining, although they're working 24/7 to serve. They have hundreds of staff, but it's, bringing out the best of other folks, being appreciative and being compassionate and tolerant. Super. Dave, we're at the top of the hour. I promised you we'd be done. And it's great. There's a few people I don't know on the screen, but I appreciate everybody sharing their St. Patty's Day with me. And Jake, thank you for sharing flying, moving cross country, and Carol, your experience, and Susan as well, everybody. Dave, I'll turn it to you.
Excellent. Well, Kit, thank you so much. That was wonderful. And clearly from the participation, I think the audience felt the same way.
If you'd like to do some further work with me, just send me a message on LinkedIn. Love to have it. Thank you, everybody.